Here at the AA, coming all the way from São Paulo. This session, we're going to discuss the issues of social exclusion and citizenship. And I would like to introduce our three panelists. First of all, we're very lucky to have Professor Lucio Kowarick here, who was mentioned at the beginning of the morning in Jorge's opening address. Professor Kowarick has written a great many books on issues of social struggle and cities and capitalism in Brazil, and he is a professor there at the University of São Paulo. We also have, following him, Dr. Nabil Bonduki, and he is an architect, urbanist, scholar who has written on the origins of urban social housing in Brazil, and he will also be able to bring his experience in the practice of architecture and urbanism also into this discussion. He is president of the São Paulo Architects Union there, and so a man of great experience in practical as well as theoretical issues. And finally, we have Professor David Sibley from the University of Hull in geography. And Professor Sibley has been working for some time on the questions of otherness and the treatment of outsider groups, particularly in Europe, but his interests range quite broadly. And so we're very lucky today to have someone who can bring an international perspective into this debate. So I would like to save my introduction of our commentator, Dr. Ronaldo Ramirez, until the end. But for right now, I would like to introduce Professor Lucio Kowarick. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you, Jorge Fiore, the Architectural Association, and Leslie Terro also, the Brazilian Center in Oxford, for this invitation. There are many ways of defining social exclusion or social marginality. And there are many names to mention it. I will not discuss this issue. I will only say that I will understand it, social exclusion or social marginality, as the opposite of the expansion of citizenship, having in mind citizenship as T.H. Marshall exposed it in his famous work, Citizen and Social Class. So, having said that, I'll begin in saying that there is no doubt that Brazil experienced, fundamentally beginning in the 1980s, significant advances in terms of electoral participation. In fact, if we compare the 5.4 million who voted in 1945, representing 17% of the population, with the more than 100 million in the race of 1996, 2/3 of the Brazilian population, it may not be said that there is a deficit of democracy in the Brazilian political system. Also from the angle of party competition, control over fraud in the counting of votes, and periodic renovation of government through legal norms, a consolidation of process normally associated with the modern condition of democracy has occurred. It is argued, however, that Brazilian society has advanced in terms of political rights, while the civil dimensions of citizenship, in particular equality before the law, and social dimensions, access to education, health care, retirement, working conditions, etc., continue to be extremely precarious for the great majority of the poor population, which, should be pointed out, continues to become poorer. It is worth emphasizing that only 10% of the population the Brazilian population has an income high enough to declare for taxing purposes. This means that the immense majority that has participated in elections in Brazil in such a state of poverty that it is invisible as far as tax collection goes. Just this fact is enough to make one think about a political system that follows democratic rules but is unable to reduce such vast social and economic disparities. How can there be political liberty and extreme social and economic inequality? This problem for Brazilian democracy has been discussed from many different angles, and I only have room here to review some themes that serve as a starting point for even increasingly necessary investigation. In this sense, it is important to emphasize the flagrant disarticulation of state bureaucracies with nefarious consequences for the measure of governability in the sense of implementation of public policies. All this, of course, in the framework of increasing unemployment and accentuated deterioration of public services. In a text which these reflections on the problematization of the crisis of the state and its connection with urban living conditions are based, Guillermo O'Donnell writes, the increasing crime rates, the illegal intervention by the police in poor neighborhoods, the dissemination practice of torture or even the summary execution of suspects from poor neighborhoods or those stigmatized in other ways, impunity in drug traffickers, and the large number of abandoned children in the streets reflect not just a process of urban decay. They also express the growing incapacity of the state to implement its own regulations. In a society where the process outlined above, the principles of citizenship are compromised as the definition of the nucleus of exclusion of exclusive attributes of modern state, the legitimate monopoly of violence is placed in check. Consider the 3,563 people killed by the military police in the metropolitan region of São Paulo between 1984 and 1989. And between 1990 and 1997, around 3,600 persons were killed in the metropolis. Many of these people were mere transients without criminal records or perpetrators of petty crimes. The key phrase to remember from all this is, it is the police who, in practice, define citizenship. Another figure, around 7,000 homicides in the metropolis, in the metropolitan area between 1993 and 1995, compared with the 3,700 between 1985 and 1987. The question of citizenship may also be approached from the angle of organizational labor struggles. Without a doubt, the 1980s saw a significant advance in the organizational workers that were expressed in the creation of a powerful centralized syndicates, which at least in economic at least in economically more developed regions, were able to penetrate a variety of different unions and work sites. It is important to emphasize that labor conflict increased during the 1980s as a fruit of political liberalization. Between 1982 and 1984, there were 920 strikes, a number that reached 3,000 in the following 3 years and almost 5,000 in the last 3 years of the decade. It is important to point out that this revigoration of union struggle, which translated into 10 million strikers in the beginning of the decade and culminated in more than 30 million at the end of the period, did not succeed to reverse the trend toward lower salaries. The drop in real remuneration of metallurgical workers in São Bernardo do Campo and Diadema, as an example, where the automobile industry, home to the syndicate with the greatest tradition of struggle in the country, is concentrated, resulted in average salaries in 1991 that equaled 30% of the 1983 wages, at the same time in which 1/3 of the positions disappeared. Examples such as this one could easily be repeated as they constitute the general rule of what has happened in Brazilian workers, even those belonging to the best organized and most combative syndicates. The intensification of labor mobilization is enabled to stop the deterioration of salaries and the increase in unemployment levels that continue to augment even after the Real Plan of 1994, revealing also through this approach the compromise of one of the most basic aspects of citizenship. The privation of the right to work constitutes for the same majority a condition of extreme pauperization. The above-mentioned delineation contains the question of why a unique event in terms of social and political mobilization, the impeachment of President Collor in 1992, did not produce alternative histories leading Brazilian society in the direction of less truculence and arbitrariness in the treatment not only of public affairs but also, and more important, of human beings. Days after the legal removal of the President of the Republic, an extremely dramatic event occurred: the execution of 111 prisoners by the military police in the Presidio of Carandiru in São Paulo. This is one of the multiple examples that point out the violation of the basic rights. Even more striking is the fact that 41% of the inhabitants of São Paulo declare their support for the state government's complicity in the massacre. The conjunctions of reflection presented previously make it possible to present the category of the first-class citizen, constituted by people with incomes higher than 10 minimum salaries, which is less than 3% of the population. This is the person capable of defending his or her rights and even privilege by relying on influential friends paying attorneys buying off the police. We also have the citizen's counterpart, the third-class citizen, with scarcely any income, one of the many who are illiterate or semi-illiterate, who lives in shark favelas draining pap, cabeças de porco, or any of the many names given to the so-called subnormal housing, and who constitute around 70% of the population of the country. This Brazilian, says José Murilo de Carvalho, belongs only nominally to the national political economy. His or her civil rights are systematically violated. He or she is guilty until proven innocent, at times even after proven innocent. This consideration permits to introduce another category. I refer to what may be designated as private citizen. It must be said initially that this idea constitutes a paradox, as if two fractions of the compound word are incompatible. This is so because the concept of citizenship refers to historically shared destinies and projects and processes of collective conquest. But there is a reason for the incompatibility of the two terms. We became private citizens guided by the morality characterizing the world of the home, because in the public space we are rigorously sub-citizens. Without a shadow of doubt, in contraposition to the security of private space, the home, the violence of the public space, the street, is one of the principal characteristics of the day-to-day in our cities. Public space translates into the banality of everyday violence, of the hours spent moving from living space to work, in the rhythm of the work routine and the resulting remuneration, not to mention the obvious decline in the power of labor or in the impunity of bandits and the police. Public space is also a synonym for fear, despair, and a sense of defeat. Fear of becoming sick, unemployed, being in an accident, jailed, or tortured. Lack of respect for pedestrians and consumers, the lines, the bureaucracy, social and economic superiors. This sense of defeat, given that the strike and urban struggle have not usually resulted in benefits for the workers and for the poor neighborhoods. To cite an example, favela dwellers in São Paulo have grown from 8% to almost 20% of the population. Sense of defeat, as not only do strikes not improve working conditions and remuneration, but also at times it seems necessary to massacre trade union movements. Such was the case, in my opinion, with regard to the intransigence with regard to the oil workers, and this during the social democratic government of President Fernando Henrique Cardoso. To sum up, a strong sense of blockage of social mobility was consolidated in the decade of the 1990s. Inequality before the law destroys the very idea of justice. Public space continues to be ruled by the principle of cordiality, as says the historian Sérgio Buarque, whose basis, far from having a structure of explicit universal rules, is founded on criteria for inclusion and exclusion of rights and duties, marked by favoritism and therefore by arbitrariness and violence, and thus the primacy of private citizen. Private in two senses, that of inaccess to benefits and that of separation, isolation, or exclusion. Thank you.
I'd like to turn it over now to Professor Nabil Bonduki.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank the Architectural Association and the Center of Brazilian Study for the invitation for this symposium, and apologize for my very poor English, but I think that you can understand, and I'm going to show several pictures because the picture value for several words. It's very important for me to speak about São Paulo and about the subject, the social exclusion, because I work, study and work in São Paulo and stay in different opportunity in contact with this problem as technical support of social movement, housing movement, and as coordinator of social housing in São Paulo, where this problem, the problem of exclusion, the social exclusion, is very strong. I'm going to speak about several manifestations of the social exclusion in the space. The problem of the homeless, the problem of the squatter, the slums, and the inequality in the city. The social inequality in São Paulo was very strong. And I think a new city that I hope we can build may be with less inequality. I'm going to speak in this about this about the new housing movement in the center of the city. The Islam's movement, where this question, the question of the fight against the social segregation in the city, was very important. The structural exclusion provoked by the unemployment and by the low salary provoke several manifestations of the exclusion. The homeless, that was very strong problem in São Paulo, is one manifestation of this absolute exclusion of the people. In the last year, with the increase of the unemployment, that in this moment the unemployment rate is 20% in metropolitan area, increase this problem that is an old problem in the poor city. It's important to say that São Paulo is not exactly a poor city. São Paulo is has a very bad income, share income. The income is very bad share, and this is the problem that I want to show you. The relative exclusion, the difference between the people that don't have anything to live. There aren't a home, there aren't food, there aren't salary, and the people that live very well in very sophisticated place, in the shopping centers, in the business center, in the areas of the very high income. You can see in this picture different manifestation of this inequality. But this is a very strong manifestation. If you can see in the city, this this radical inequality is very strong too in the city, where you have a squatter where 2 million people live only in the city of São Paulo. In the metropolitan area is 2 million and a half. Is a very strong problem, in contrast with the center, with the verticalization that Raquel spoke in the morning. Here you can see a right, the richer area in the city, the Jardins, and a very bad, a very bad squatter. The very well urbanized area, the parks, in one hand, and on the other hand, the housing in very bad condition on the river or on the streams. And on the other hand, the public housing, the social public housing, in the time of the National Housing Bank, produced one housing in the very far areas, outskirts, in the periphery of the city, without any urban and social support. And this is other question of inequality of the city, the place where the people live, the more part of the people live, and the place in another side of the city where the more part of the people work. And the public investment, I speak in general, of course there are several differences between local administration, but in general the administration put more money in the implantation of roads and freeways and other very expensive building. In opposite, several areas, squatter, remain completely abandoned. But I'm going to show for you a very interesting work made by Catholic University, that is the map of the exclusion. The city of São Paulo is divided in 90 districts, and each district have several index, 20 index of quality of life. And this map of exclusion is a very important instrument to work and to know the inequality in the city. In this map, we can see in yellow, the yellow is the poorest area, and the black, the gray, is the richer area. You can see better what Raquel showed in the morning. Show it in the morning. That is in the center and mainly in the southeast area. We have the richer area, and in the outskirts, north, east, and south, the poorest area. In that table, right, you can see the richer area, Morumbi, that have 260 times more people that receive more than 20 salarios than in the poor area in Cidade Tiradentes. Morumbi is the richer area in the city, and Cidade Tiradentes the poor. It's 60 times more richer. than the Cidade Tiradentes. And in several other maps, you can see in this area, there are some difference, but in this area, the people that have better housing comfort or housing quality. In this area, it's several is a little difference, but it's very and in the redder is the best condition. The worst, yes. I'm sorry, but you can understand. I know. This other important index is the education. Of course, education is a very important instrument for the life, for the be better condition of life, and the same condition happen. Exactly the same condition. Of course, there are any difference, but it's important that there are a very similar situation between the income and the housing condition and urban condition. But I'm going to show this is the life quality and social exclusion. Here is interesting is a resume of the exclusion, the map of exclusion, where you can see the several index mix to make this map where this several condition I show is very well represented. But I'm going to show another important question that I'm going to speak now is the situation of the slums and exactly the relationship between the exclusion, this map of exclusion, and this new movement of Islam. Here you have the time of transportation. Of course, this is consequence of what Raquel showed in the morning, where in the east, in the south, and the north, you have the people that spend more time to go to the work. The work was exactly, this is the map of the work, emprego is work, job, and the job is exactly in this area, the center of the city, it's here the center of the city, and the southeast area, and in one ring around the center. This part of the ring I want to emphasize, because this part of the ring is not, is this part here, is not a good life condition. It's very close to the center, it's very close to the jobs, but didn't have a good condition of life and of housing. And exactly the people that need live close to the job, don't want or don't or can't spend 3 hours for a day to go to the work. These people here in this header is the people that need more than 3 hours to go to the job, and these people of course don't have time to the professional qualification and to the professional qualification and for other important condition for improve his life condition. This is one sector of this area of the city. It's a sector where there are squatters, there are jobs, there are slums like this. This condition of Islam is a very mix between social class and functional urban functions. The people that live in this area pay a lot of money to live in very bad condition. They need to sleep, cook in the same room. They need to the laundry facility. It's very very few for all the family that live in this condition. Well, it's important to show, but I'm going to speak about this in the tomorrow in my presentation about the social housing policy in São Paulo in the time of the Workers' Party in the early 90s. But this housing project was exactly the first project in this area of the city. And here is a very representative words. Trabalhador, worker, build his house in the center. This is a very important, these two projects, very important for starter and stimulated the movement of the slums. Other important inspiration of this movement was the rural, the landless rural movement that in Brazil in the last 4 or 5 years was a stronger social movement. This movement, landless movement, has a strategic that squatter land not with the objective to stay in the land necessarily, but to press the government to improve a distribution of land. And the people of the slums, inspired in this movement, started building squatter. Several empty public building in the center of the city was squatted by the people that live in this area of the city to press the local administration, the city hall, and the housing company of the state to implement a housing policy in the center of the city. This is a very interesting words too. Is squatting this building for lack for housing policy. And this in the center of the city, exactly the center of the city. Here is the place where the city was founded 4 centuries ago. All these people, all this building was squattering. This movement identify 200 building, big building like this, or like the first I show, empty in the center of the city, in the first view of this situation. Of course, the empty building in the center of the city and in this area, in the ring around the center, is one consequence of the economic transformation of the city. I don't have time to speak about this, but I think in the seminar, in the symposium, this question came again. Of course, this building is a old business building that is empty because the activity changed for new areas exactly in that southwest area that is in this moment the new area of business. here is the first conquest of this movement when they occupied old building in this area. This building won by the University of São Paulo and was empty for several years. And the people squat this building and pressed the housing company, and the company finally buy this building, the building that was in this land, and they beginning to build a new housing complex. These people, in this case, and I'm going to speak more about this tomorrow, building in self-management system. I don't have time more to speak, but I'm going to finally said that I think that the transformation of the city is not only an economic process, is not only a consequence of the globalization, the world globalization, but is, of course, consequence of the social movements in the social and urban movement in the city. And I think that this is very important for us that work and study the city. Thank you.
Well, I know now many of you will be returning tomorrow to hear the rest of Professor Bonduki's points, but right now we'll turn it over to David Sibley. Thank you.
Thanks very much. My comments may seem rather Eurocentric, and I'm reluctant to suggest that what I have to say will have particular relevance to São Paulo. But what I do want to do is to suggest why it may be that problems of exclusion are so persistent and so widespread. First of all, I would say that I'm not particularly happy with the term social exclusion, partly because of the fact that the term has been appropriated by the British government and seems to be implying that some tinkering with the margins is all that is required to solve problems. More particularly, I want to suggest that questions of social, and these are often also spatial marginalization of urban populations, involves more than weak or non-existent connections to the mainstream economy. And the representation of the problem as an economic one is clearly evident in programs to alleviate social exclusion. For example, many local projects in European cities, which are funded by the European Commission during the 1990s, were seen essentially as economic fixes, I think, like bicycle repair projects in Murcia, for example. There's nothing wrong with that, I think, but I think the problem is more complex. Obviously, the integration of excluded groups in the labour market is important, but the success of programs to achieve integration, I think, depends on an understanding of the complex nature of power relations, and I would suggest that they are more complex and is often projected in a lot of policy documents. If, for example, we consider the problem of the withdrawal of financial services from poor and racialized spaces in West European and North American cities, it seems to me that we have to consider that the stereotypical view of people and place held by financial decision makers are important in relation to their assessment of risk. So I don't see the economic perspective on this as sufficient. We have to think of other things. Now, what I want to do now is just to consider 4 or 5 arguments in relation to the problem of distancing from other people. So these are very general points, and that they tend to be somewhat speculative. My approach to understanding the problem in the first place has been to look at psychoanalytical theory. This may be seen by some as a rather bourgeois preoccupation, but I do think that psychoanalysis provides a language, one language among others, for talking about anxieties which are associated with the evident urge to marginalize some groups in metropolitan areas and elsewhere. Freud's conception of the social self, and more particularly developments of Freud's ideas by people like Melanie Klein in her work on object relations, suggest how other people can enter the unconscious or be introjected, as she put it, as bad objects, and then how simultaneously bad objects can be embodied in others through projection onto the social plane, thus perpetuating stereotypical views of other cultures. As Sander Gilman put it, stereotypes are images of things we both fear and glorify, and stereotypes and mental constructs which are a necessary part of our coming to terms with the world. Most psychoanalysts associate normal development with an increasing appreciation of the complexity of the world, but I want to suggest that in modern societies there are aspects of material culture, including the built form of cities, which encourage a simplified view of social difference, and this in turn, I think, contributes to distanciation and rejection. Who or what we reject can be represented, I think, as what Julia Kristeva has termed the abject. Kristeva was here thinking primarily of the body, and specifically the skin, as the boundary of the self, and those bodily residues like sweat and dead skin and so on, which in many cultures are considered to be polluting. They're always there. They're there, but we engage in an endless battle to remove them, obviously by washing, by deodorizing, and so on. The presence of bodily residues induces feelings of anxiety, but what I would argue is that such feelings about what we generally categorize as dirt are transferred to everyday domestic objects and beyond, within the domestic sphere to kitchen units, carpets, and coffee tables. Consumer culture heightens our consciousness of dirt through the promotion of whiteness and shininess and an excessive concern with germs. However, the mixing of objects or disorder itself becomes a signifier of dirt. So we get these elisions, I think, between various residues and ideas of mixing more generally. And as Mary Douglas argued in Purity and Danger, dirt is simply matter out of place, and the unwanted mixing of objects becomes itself a source of abjection. Now, there are two ways in which I would develop this argument. First, I think it's interesting to see how the language used to describe the abject in relation to the body and the domestic sphere is used also to describe some marginalized cultures. For example, racist discourse applied to gypsies and other nomads, people who do not insist on the same separations that apply in the larger society, particularly between the spaces of work, residence, and recreation, are often bracketed with dirt. Their material culture may appear disorderly or dirty from the outside, while their own pollution taboos remain invisible to outsiders. More generally, there appears to be an elision of what Constance Perrin calls imperfect people, social disorder, and a lack of order in the built environment, disordered or abject landscapes with which imperfect people are associated. So I'm suggesting this intimate association between the environment and people, that they both become part of a stereotype. To emphasize this last point, and I thought this might be appropriate in this sort of gathering, I just want to quote briefly from a planning classic, that is Le Corbusier's City of Tomorrow, where he reflected on Paris's social geography and the possibilities of planning. He says, "Paris is a dangerous magma of human beings gathered from every quarter by conquest, growth, and immigration. She is the eternal gypsy encampment from all the world's great roads. It wasn't actually the term gypsy that attracted me to this quote in the first place, however. Paris is the seat of power and the home of a spirit which could enlighten the world. She digs and hacks through her undergrowth, and out of these evils she is tending towards an ordered system of straight line and right angles. This clearing process is indispensable to the expression of her spirit, which is fundamentally limpid and beautiful. Le Corbusier's desire for order and his view of the evils of the metaphorical undergrowth and the dangerous flow of people to Paris seem to me to be still reflected in some examples of current practice. And here I'll rashly suggest that Barcelona's grand projects, particularly the completion of Cerda's plan for the city and the cleaning up of the ethnically diverse and heterogeneous Central Raval district through the insertion of a large square and rambla, are such projects which remove the dirt, they remove the homeless, the squatters, the gypsies, and this distanciation confirms the marginal and polluting status of these minorities. One consequence then of the distancing from dirt is an ignorance of other life worlds. The capacity of some marginal groups to adapt to the city through their informal, often hidden economic activities is not appreciated, they become invisible, and their capacity is then reduced through the purification of space. Distanciation or exclusion are also expressed in the built environment in moves to make life safer and more predictable. In countries like Britain, there is in many public and private spheres an emphasis on being safe, on risk reduction, expressed in such developments as gated communities, which must be a global phenomenon because there is now one in Hull. Also the surveillance of shopping malls and city centres, and such routine daily phenomena as the practice of parents driving their children short distances to school. Strongly bounded spaces like gated communities and well-insulated capsules, cars, distance those on the inside from potentially dangerous chance encounters. But strangers, those who these safe environments are designed to keep out, have an important role in humanizing the city. As Zygmunt Bauman wrote, strangers bring the outside in, and in so doing, they seem to disturb the physical and psychical distance, the sought-after coordination between moral and topological closeness, the staying together of friends and the remoteness of enemies. I would contend that we cannot engineer exclusion solely through economic policies, but we must also attend to these issues of social and spatial separation, which are integral to power relations in the modern city. Unfortunately, much built form associated with consumption, servicing and residential space seems to me to be only confirming or even exacerbating the problem of spatial purification and distanciation. So my view of social exclusion is as something which is likely to persist because of these contradictions between the desire to include but the continuing production of exclusionary spaces. Thank you.
Well, we've now seen and heard three very, very different ways of trying to describe and come to terms with the problem of social exclusion and marginality. And we can now experience just how difficult it is to begin to think about how to treat this in architecture or urban policy terms. But we're very lucky to have with us Dr. Ronaldo Ramirez, who has quite a bit of experience in beginning to find a way through this minefield. Dr. Ramirez is now the director of the master's course on international housing studies at the Development and Planning Unit here in London. But he has also taught in both South America and North America as well. He has, in addition, been an urban policy consultant in Africa, Mideast, Asia, and the Americas. So hopefully we will, through his guidance, begin to find our way towards some of the questions that might help us work towards some greater understanding of this minefield clearly. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the introduction, but I think that I share John Humphrey's views in the previous comment that I will never accept again George Fiori invitation to come to comment on papers which are of this complexity, particularly if it is after lunch. Concerning the other starting point, which is everybody is apologizing about the English, I'm not going to apologize about mine, because after 30 years in London, I think that I am inventing a new branch of English that in 300 years maybe is going to be quite successful. Now, I will try to somehow to link what we have seen this afternoon, what we saw this morning, in the morning. I have been in many debates between Paul Hirst and Nigel Harris. And obviously, the conclusion that one has out of all this discussion is that they are both probably right, and they are this very interesting. But there is something much more serious on that, is that there is the idea, the evidence that something very important has been happening in the last 10 years in the countries of the world. A number of changes are taking place, a new way of approaching things, a new ideologies, new policies, new conventions, and also that this had been very important in the countries of Latin America. Among other things, because the countries of Latin America had been hit by these changes in a very strong way, precisely because they have models of development that had been rejected and had been changed with a very high price. Now, we can discuss that many times, and we can discuss, probably we are going to need another 10 years in order to know what is really happening and what are all the implications of that. The question for this meeting this afternoon is, in fact, who pays for all those changes? And this is what comes at the end as the very important question for people like me, for example, that have to respond in front of the students about what are the implications for cities, housing, and for social policies of all these changes which are taking place today. Who pays for this? And the answer has been, in this afternoon, provided by our three speakers, the three people that have presented this before. The evidence which are presented here tell us about a reduction of salaries, tell us about a reduction of jobs simultaneously with the reduction of salaries, tell us about a number of economic problems which are affecting the people in many countries. Nigel also will tell us, I'm sure, I don't know if Nigel is here yet, but that there are many other places in which things have improved. We have a sort of ranking for every place that he mentioned where things are improved. We mentioned 3 where things have been deteriorated. But that's not the way to argue. The question is that there are, up to now, evidences one after the other, and in particular in Latin America, the things are deteriorated very badly. However, I don't think that this is only something that can be expressed or measured in terms of economic categories. I think that there are other categories as well which are extremely important, which are not always being taken into account. The dignity of the people who have been made redundant massively, the way in which they have been treated, the fact that their organization has been destroyed, the fact that their positions as workers have been assimilated in many places, and the fact that they are practically criminals. I mean, I don't want to over-dramatize this, but it is important, for example, to remember that one of the characteristics of the Pinochet regime in my old country was precisely that, the humiliation of the workers, making them feel that they were suspect, they were criminals that had to show as I think Lucio said just now that they are in fact innocent because they are considered to be guilty from the beginning. And the treatment was not accidental, it was systematic. It was systematic and they were treated in that way. People had been made feel that they are not necessary. The whole ideology that we receive through the press, through the radio, through the television, is that people are not necessary. Okay? We don't need people. We just have transactions, operations, movement of flow of capital, tradable. This is a very interesting word, tradable. And now, to my surprise, tradable start to appear now related in this morning, associated also to people. Are we trading people? That's more or less where we are going. I think that Lucio and Nabil show evidences of this situation, very dramatic evidences. I can also show them London, to go around London, and we can make, and I have the same photographs, because this is not related only to the situation in Latin America or the third world. It's one of the expression of that word that we don't want to show, no mention, which is globalization. These things are appearing, as I said, it can be presented. But I also want to mention something which is important in our field. These are not only economic categories, I insist on that. And the way, for example, in which the last paper approached this, show us the importance of widening the perspective that we have to introduce dimensions which are not always introduced in our dialogue. They are not always introduced in the type of literature that we use. What has this to do with cities? If I am too loud, you tell me and I stop. What does have to do with cities? It's not just the fact that cities are the place where all these things become very evident. This is one important dimension. But there are several aspects that have to be considered, and I will only look at two of them very briefly, because it's associated with what we have been discussing precisely this afternoon. The first thing is that this situation is, in fact, in danger of destroying what is the most essential character of the city, which is a place of social integration, social communication, is a place of social interactions through which human beings and humankind have been enriched. The tendencies which are coming out of this situation is not only segregation, separation, but even absolute protection. People who protect themselves behind walls in order not to have anything to do with anybody else. The cases of cities which have been mentioned, there's accidental, like Bogota, in which you move from your house to your school, to your place of work, to the movies, to the supermarket, to absolutely everything without moving away from a sort of enclave in which the police is all the time protecting you. I don't know if that is a life that you would like to live, but that is a consequence precisely of this type of situation. The second thing which I also want to mention is this. The whole idea of poverty these days has been enlarged, enriched, and people are increasingly incorporating new approaches to that. One of the very important aspects of this is the understanding that was being discussed of the multidimensional, the simultaneously condition of poverty, that poverty cannot be expressed only for a particular aspect. Now, the city is the place precisely where the simultaneous character of poverty, the multidimensional character of poverty appears in front of us. Now, those two aspects make the city, on the one hand, as an element of I would say, an invention of human beings of enormous importance, which is in danger, and on the other hand, as an instrument in which this thing can be observed and can be examined as an extraordinary positive instrument to face this particular situation. Now, finally with this, I think that there is reaction. I think that the people in the cities react. Violence is one of the reactions. I mean, who wants to be a criminal? I don't want to be a criminal. I don't want to go around nagging people, but I can understand that. I can understand when criminality acquires a scale in which it cannot be presented anymore as a problem of individual deviances. It has to be a much more serious presentation of that. Now, on that point, I would like to say only one thing. Yes, we are going to face the problem of the poverty of the city. We are facing the problem of the cities. But I am a little alarmed by this point that Nigel made this morning, in the sense that the defense of the city appears when those elements which are going to be defended are in fact expressed in economic categories. In other words, the idea that the city now is concerned with problems of health because health brings revenue from business, or concerned with education because education brings revenues of any type. I have no doubt that there is an economic dimension to everything. But I think that unless we can introduce an ethical dimension to the way in which the struggle for the solution of these problems in the city appears, just to concentrate that exclusively on the economic factors, on the economic values of this, implied, in fact, missing the point precisely that the city is telling us all the time, that the situation of the people who are in these conditions in the city is not only economic. It affects a very large range of aspects, a very large range of aspects, most of them we don't still know them. We still don't understand them. We still need to learn about them, okay? And that, I think, is the big, interesting lesson that we have been having this afternoon here from our colleagues. Thank you very much.
Well, everyone has been very careful to stay within their time, so we actually have a good deal of time now. We have over half an hour for discussion, so I would like to invite questions to be raised now.
I have a question initially to Professor Bonduki and subsequently to all of us. Thank you. And you have demonstrated clearly the social inequality and social injustice by showing a different type of people, the wealthy people and the poor. And my question is regarding to recent study in urban policy making, and which reveals the fact that the failure of this implementation is due to the fact that the policymakers' language actually doesn't belong to the so-called people. The people simply doesn't understand what it says. And at that point, we have to think about the change of agency, of social change. And so regarding to São Paulo's situations, and I have one question to Professor Bonduki. Which side are you belongs to? And then are you belongs to so-called the people, which you're talking about? And if this is not the case, who else in this conference belongs to that part of agency? And if there isn't any, maybe that's the problem. Regarding to the notion of integration of agency, who actually make policy? And who making policy? That's the question.
Well, if I understand well, I think one side of this problem is as a technique. I am a technique, and I am politician. I think as a technique in São Paulo, there are several people that work in the support of the movement, the social movement against the poverty. I think this is an important question in Brazil, in São Paulo, in the last 20 years. important support of the technical in the political and social movements. In the housing movements, this is very important because several works needs technical support to implement proposal of new policies.
By whom?
Huh?
By whom?
By room? Por quem? Bom, the people. I don't know if I understand. For the people find for themselves, of course. The people form movements because they have very bad condition, and they canalize it for political movements and social movement. Their fight against the poverty. This is the main motto of this fight. But
people can fight against poverty by themselves. Why do they need a policymaker or planner? Which is, I'm asking your position. And that's actually what the recent study and urban policy making has revealing, that the fact that the policymaker is actually part of the society, is not somebody who's standing outside the system, who's looking at system as autonomous. So at that point, certain point, we have to question actually who you are and which path you can take and how you can change and implement the change in the social context. So the understanding, awareness of your position as a planner or policymaker in the context of what you're looking at is extremely important. And I want to clarify that aspect. And because the planner doesn't speak the language of so-called people, the most of the activity in urban context remains invisible, as Professor Harris presented in the morning. That 60% of the economical activity is invisible. Why is that? Because we have to question on that. The fundamental question. And if you don't see what it is, how on earth we can think that we can implement something? It's very dangerous.
yes, I think the social movement in Brazil, I think in all the parts of the world it's the same, changed a lot. I'm going to change more. In this moment in São Paulo, the labor, the unions was in decrease, but grow a lot association of the people that informal trade and the people will work out of the formal market of work. This is a new phenomenon in social phenomenon. I don't know where it's going to be in the next year, but I think the traditional forms of participation is changed a lot. And on the other hand, I think it's important the role of the local administration in this problem, because now I think is not more the time where the government do all the thing for the people, but new forms of partnership between the people, the association people with the local administration can produce a new policy for the city. It's not more a question of assistance, social assistance, but a work in partnership between the people and the administration, the city hall, or other kinds of government.